Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us here on The Breakfast Show on Sky News this Thursday morning. The Chancellor will set out new measures today to try to ease the cost of living crisis as the Prime Minister says it's time to move on from Partygate. The long-awaited Sue Gray report was published yesterday and laid bare the culture of Downing Street at the time, with details of partying, drinking and a lack of respect shown to security and cleaning staff. In just a moment, I'll be joined by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, that's Steve Barclay, and later in the show we'll hear from Labour's Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary. It is Thursday, the 26th of May. The party's over. The Prime Minister says it's time to move on from Sue Gray's Partygate report, but how long will his MPs back him?
I'm at number 10, where Boris Johnson is hoping to move on from the Partygate saga, but can he today shift attention to the cost of living?
The Chancellor will announce new measures later to help households struggling with soaring prices.
Further help is expected to tackle spiralling energy bills. I'm at a school in South East London to ask parents and teachers if it'll go far enough.
And I'm at the World Economic Forum in Davos as the Chancellor prepares to announce a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies.
Texas offers tears and prayers at a vigil for the children of Robb Elementary School, but its political leaders reject calls for gun control.
The proposals the Democrats have, none of them would have stopped this.
But why does this only happen in your country?
And a review into the deaths of Arthur Labino Hughes and Star Hobson find that child protection in England needs to change fundamentally. Also coming up this morning, wherever you're watching us right around the world, 5 months on from one of the worst, the world's first, I should say, forgive me, double hand transplant, the Ayrshire man learning to stroke his dog again and hoping to get back to work very soon. And we'll be speaking to the head of an international charity. It's a children's charity, and it's the head of the 10th anniversary of their famed Sierra Leone Marathon. Hi everyone, a very good morning to you. The Chancellor is expected to set out new support today to help tackle the ever-growing cost of living crisis. But the Prime Minister's critics have questioned the timing of the announcement just a day after Sue Gray's report into lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street was published. The full report paints a damning picture, including parties past midnight, a culture of drinking, and multiple examples of what's described as a lack of respect towards security and cleaning staff. COVID-19 was officially declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization on the 30th of June 2020. England entered its first full lockdown on the 23rd of March. Between the 14th of May and the 23rd of June, widespread restrictions were still in place. Social gatherings indoors were banned. Towards the end of this period, people were only permitted to meet outside in groups of up to 6 people. It was at this time that 4 parties were held in Whitehall, including one for Mr Johnson's birthday in the Cabinet Room. A full lockdown returned on the 5th of November 2020. Indoor household mixing was banned and people were only allowed to meet outdoors with a maximum of 1 person from another household. During this time, 2 parties were held in Whitehall, including one where the Prime Minister is pictured raising a glass during a leaving party in Downing Street. In the run-up to Christmas, 4 others were held during this time. London was in Tier 4, meaning people had to stay at home and individuals could only meet 1 person from another household in an outdoor public space. 2021, there were a further 3 parties, 2 later in April and 1 which was held in Downing Street on the 14th of January. The country at that time was in full lockdown. Chief of Staff Steve Barclay at Downing Street is with us, also an MP. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. We all want to believe that behind that famous black door, known probably the most famous door in the world, there are people who have the utmost integrity. Instead, there were people drinking until they were sick, a drunken brawl breaking out, red wine stains on the walls in Downing Street, laughing at cleaning staff who was saying, you know, this is not appropriate, abusing security staff. What's your reaction?
Well, the Prime Minister was appalled to read that when he got that report that he himself commissioned yesterday morning. That is why, Kay, he has made such significant changes, and those changes are recognised in the report. And it's also why he went personally to apologise to staff yesterday, because he was so shocked by what he read.
Yeah, I'm asking for your reaction to...
Well, equally, I was sat with the Prime Minister in his office when that report came in that he had commissioned, and it came into his office at 10 o'clock. And like him, I was shocked, particularly around what Sue Gray had said in terms of the cleaning staff. We had an all-staff meeting yesterday in Downing Street. Further to that, it is why we've had so many changes in terms of both myself going into Downing Street, the Permanent Secretary, a new Director of Communication, a new Principal Private Secretary. It's why we put procedures now in place. But we were appalled, and that's why, as I say, the Prime Minister apologised. It's why he went to the House of Commons and he said how humbled he was to read about what had happened.
What were you most shocked about?
I think the disrespect to staff within the building. I think that was, for someone from me, you know, growing up in Lancashire, coming from a background that I do, I was particularly shocked to read that.
And he's apologised personally to all of the staff that were affected?
He went and apologised to staff. Obviously, there's the shift rotas, so it's a question of which staff were in the building yesterday.
But he's gone to seek out the cleaning staff? He
has gone out to seek out staff to do that. He came to the House as well in terms of colleagues. And it's why he's made so many changes in response. And Sue Gray recognises those changes in the report and say those should now be able to bed down. Why
did he tell Parliament on the 8th of December that no rules were broken?
Because, as he said in his statement, he was working, he was going for a very short period of time to events in his work capacity. And indeed, that has been reflected, Kay, in the response from the Met Police. Now, clearly, long after he had gone, there were incidents, as you say, at the top of this item, in terms of their behaviour. But this was things that happened when sometimes he wasn't even in the building, he was at Chequers, or long after he had left.
But he did attend 8 of the 16 parties that Sue Gray events that Sue Gray was talking about. He also said he felt a duty to say goodbye to colleagues. So he could say goodbye to a work colleague, but people watching this programme this morning couldn't say goodbye to a dying relative?
Yes, and I've seen that in terms of commentary, and I think all of us, I know you said at the start, as a constituency MP, I know from my own families in the constituency that was heartbreaking for people that weren't able to say goodbye. I think it was probably the worst feature, one of the worst features of the pandemic, that people didn't get that moment of being able to say goodbye. I think, as was covered at the time in the rules, people working in Downing Street, because of the nature of their jobs, working for the Prime Minister, were there working on our vaccine rollout, ensuring we had the PPE, working very long hours in tight-knit situations, and there was a work exemption for them to be able to work together. And it was in that context that the Prime Minister was very briefly, usually for a matter of minutes, joining people.
Why would he feel that he could say goodbye to a work colleague, but people couldn't go to a graveside?
Because they were already in the building, they were already working in tight-knit groups, they were already there.
6 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of champagne and a bottle of gin on the table. What sort of workplace is that?
Well, as I say, you know, these were the Metas looked at these issues, these were very brief periods of time. The nature of a Prime Minister's job is to go from meeting to meeting to meeting. That is the nature of their job. But at the same time, he has recognised the need for changes. He's made those changes, and Sue Gray herself has recognised there's been significant change with a Permanent Secretary, with a change of leadership team as a result of the lessons we've learned.
Meeting names change. People advised to dodge photographers. One special advisor saying our drinks, which we seem to have got away with. I mean, it was a culture of rule-breaking, and he is the chief exec, if you will. He was presiding over it all.
Well, I think there is a difference, and I think people recognise between the Prime Minister going from meetings to meetings in the course of a working day and people who, late at night, long after he has gone, where behaviours clearly were inappropriate. And that's why he himself, I was sat with him yesterday when the report came in after 10 o'clock, and he was shocked by that, and that's why he gave the apology that he did.
Well, let me read exactly what the number 10 special advisor texted Martin Reynolds about the 20th of May event, just to flag that the press conference, which we were all watching, will probably be finishing around that time. So helpful if people can be mindful of that as speakers and cameras are leaving, not walking around waving bottles of wine, etc. You're telling me that the Prime Minister didn't know about any of that?
Well, the Prime Minister wouldn't have seen those sort of emails and messages.
And Martin Reynolds wouldn't have brought it to his attention, even though it was his job.
The Prime Minister's, in the course of his day, working very long hours. I mean, some of these incidents, Kay, happened when he wasn't even there. He was at
But some
Chequers.
happened when he was.
So there's a question, and he addressed that in his statement to the House of Commons, that going to something for a matter of minutes to thank people as part of his role as Prime Minister is very different to the very shocking things, quite rightly, you're highlighting, Kay. They are shocking. I was shocked to read them yesterday, but they're different to things that were done in his prime ministerial capacity.
So you're basically doing the job that Martin Reynolds had done previously. If this sort of stuff had come to light for you, would you have brought it to the attention of the Prime Minister?
Well, actually, my role is different. We also have a new principal private secretary, but it's part of a wider team, so the whole team.
But would you, if you'd known this, would you have brought it to the
Well, I would
attention of
hope
the
so,
Prime
but
Minister?
obviously it's difficult to second-guess the very intense working conditions. I wasn't in Downing Street at the time, so it would be difficult for me to second-guess the pressures, the intensity, the things that people were going through at that time. I was working in the Treasury. My role was in a different way. But we've recognised...
Is this happening at the Treasury?
No, it wasn't.
How do you know?
Well, because I was working in the Treasury. The Treasury is a very different building, and I think one of the challenges, actually, for people working in Downing Street is just the layout, the nature of the building, very, very small rooms. The Treasury actually is a very different composition, and more people were able to work at home. So just the structures between the two.
Yeah, but if it was... OK, so let me put it this way, then. If it was happening in Downing Street now, you wouldn't know because of the way the building's set up?
No, the point is you would know because there's lots of small rooms and it's a house, in essence, and therefore people are much closer together. The two are just different working.
OK, you've been an MP since 2010. Was it your understanding that David Cameron would have overseen Wine Time Friday?
I don't know. I mean, I was a backbench MP at the time, so I wasn't working in Downing Street, and
Which
I wasn't close to...
Which brings me on to Theresa May, because you weren't. You were a Brexit secretary, weren't you? Would you have seen Wine Time Fridays when she was in Downing Street?
Well, again, I wasn't working... You're referring to the press office. I wasn't working in the press office. I was actually, again, working in number 9 at Downing Street. So it's just simply about where, if you're asking in terms of my own personal roles, I was working in number 9.
Do you think Theresa May would have been happy with what was happening in Downing Street?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you're asking me to have...
You do know exactly what sort of woman she was, and she wouldn't have been at all happy.
You know, sitting with the Prime Minister yesterday, he was shocked, and particularly, as I say, around the treatment by some staff of others in the building. And that is something the Prime Minister was not aware of. He was shocked by. It is why he's made the significant changes, and it is more than why the lessons are learnt. And indeed, that's why he said he was so humbled yesterday when he discovered those sort of incidents.
Sue Gray said he should accept and bear ultimate responsibility.
Well, he did. He went to the House of Commons and he said that. He gave an apology. He accepted that he is ultimately responsible. He explained his role as Prime Minister, and people were working incredibly intensively within Downing Street during that time. It was an extremely challenging time, but at the same time, it's clear mistakes were made, and that's why, following the interim report, the Prime Minister changed the senior team and took on board the comments she made.
Does the PM have honour?
Yes, he does.
Does he tell lies?
No, he doesn't.
He's been sacked twice for lying.
Well, you know, you asked my opinion. I work very closely with him. He is focused on our response to Russia-Ukraine. He's focused on the huge challenge economically for families, for your viewers, in terms of the cost of energy, the cost of food. He's getting on with the job. He got the big calls right, including during COVID, the fastest rollout. Last year, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7. On Russia-Ukraine, he has led
and I want to come on to the cost of living in just a second.
He has been getting the big calls right, but he accepted, in terms of some of these incidents, that there were lessons to be learned.
OK. Martin Reynolds is still working for the government. He's reportedly being lined up for an ambassador's job. Allegra Stratton was expected to fall on her sword. You're a modern politician. Are you content with those two scenarios?
Well, it's not appropriate, and it never has been under successive administrations, for ministers to start commenting on individual sort of HR matters. Obviously, Sue Gray has addressed some of those points, particularly around more junior staff versus senior staff, but these will be for the civil service to take forward in terms of their...
I understand, but Allegra Stratton was a broken woman. We saw her outside her house, absolutely bereft by what had happened, and yet the man who was, you know, ultimately her boss, I suppose, he looks as though he might be an ambassador in Saudi Arabia.
Well, the point is most of the people named in this report have actually left the civil service. In terms of one or two individuals that are still there, as I say, Kay, I don't think it's appropriate as a minister to start speculating.
OK, well, let me ask you, do you think, were you content
cases.
with the way Allegra Stratton was treated?
Well, I wasn't at number 10 at
I know.
the time. So,
that doesn't matter.
Well, it's very difficult for me to know exactly what happened at that time. I wasn't there. What I can say, having worked with Allegra at the Treasury, is just how highly respected Allegra was at the Treasury and still is from ministers and certainly colleagues that worked with her there.
We believe that moving on to the windfall tax, we believe that is definitely going to go ahead. That's what our Tamara has told us this morning, and basically she knows everything. So let's just say that it is.
We can agree on Tamara knowing what.
There we go. So she says it is going ahead. This is what the Chancellor told the Commons on the 3rd of February this year. Of course, the windfall tax sounds superficially appealing, but we on the government benches deal with complex problems in a responsible way. Here's the rub. The obvious impact of a windfall tax would be to deter investment. It is as simple as that. Why has he changed his mind?
Well, he's right that what Labour were proposing in terms of their windfall tax would have deterred investment. And we've just brought out our energy strategy, and a key part of that is how we attract inward investment. Indeed, as a key part of responding to the cost of living and having a long-term energy strategy. What we've said, Kay, throughout is we need to do two things. Firstly, recognise that there is a huge pressure coming for families in terms of energy costs and food costs. Actually, there's a huge pressure now, but we can see coming to the autumn that is going to get worse. So we need to be in a position to have targeted support to those families. But then in terms of paying for that, as we look at the balance between how much is done through debt and how much is done through revenue raising, we need to do that in a way that doesn't deter investment. And having worked with the Chancellor throughout the pandemic, what I know is he's across the detail, incredibly diligent, and looks at getting that balance right in a way that the windfall tax proposed by the Labour Party simply would have deterred the inward investment that would have cut across our energy strategy.
Which part of Lancashire are you from?
Lytham.
Lytham, oh, posh bit. Lytham St Albans is very posh. What do you think the good people of Lytham would think this morning about the timing of this announcement?
In what way?
The fact that it's the day after the Sue Gray report.
Well, no, I think it's because we've had the Ofgem guidance. Firstly, on the Sue Gray report, we don't control the timing of that, Kay.
No, but you do control the timing.
No. So in terms of the timing of that, firstly, we don't control the timing of the Sue Gray report, and indeed, the timing of that is shaped by the Met Police investigation. What we've always said is, in terms of the fiscal response, we wanted to see from the Ofgem guidance what the full impact would be in the autumn of families so that we can get the design of that package right. So it's absolutely logical. We've had that guidance this week from Ofgem. That is why the Chancellor is coming forward today. It's also, in terms of Parliament and the parliamentary timetable, Parliament will be off next week for the Jubilee. So it's logical, before Parliament goes into a recess, on the back of the Ofgem guidance this week, that we then bring forward this statement. We obviously don't control the timing of the Sue Gray report.
Are the sand dunes still as lovely in Lytham?
They're fantastic,
Isn't it? It's a beautiful part of the world. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you. Let's have a look at what's happening as far as the papers are concerned this morning. The Metro has the headline, "We got away with it," paraphrasing the words of a former senior Downing Street official in a message to a colleague at the time of the parties. The eye quotes from the report describing a failure of leadership in Number 10 and across Whitehall. The Guardian mentions the drinking, fights and vomiting that allegedly took place at the gatherings. The Mail says what many Conservative supporters believe, that Boris Johnson feels he has been vindicated. The headline is that it? Similar sentiments in the Express. Really? Is this what all the fuss is about? But as you might expect, the Mirror's take on is it that Boris Johnson is just laughing at us all. The government's insistence that it's time to move on from the matter is reflected in the Telegraph, with the Chancellor poised to announce additional help for energy customers. And finally, the Times says the Chancellor will announce that every household in Britain is to get hundreds of pounds to help them cope with the cost of living. Still to come on the programme for you this morning, we'll hear from the chair of the House of Commons Committee on Standards, that's Chris Bryant, as he gives his reaction to Sue Gray's full report. Just after 8, we'll get Labour's reaction with the shadow levelling up Secretary Lisa Nandy. And then we'll discuss where the Prime Minister goes from here with his former press secretary, that's Will Walton. the wake of Sue Gray's report, the government is this morning looking to refocus, with the Chancellor expected to announce a windfall tax on energy companies in a bid to ease the cost of living crisis. Well, joining us now from Tyne Mill Academy in South East London is Ivor, and Paul is standing by at the World Economic Forum in Davos for us. Paul, to you, first of all, if I may, a windfall tax.
Yes, something, as you've just been putting to the government's representative this morning, the Chancellor said he opposed. Most of the ministers in charge have said they've opposed it, including the Business Secretary, but now it is coming. It's effectively a retrospective tax on the enormous profits that oil and gas companies have been making as energy prices have spiked. Around £8 billion BP reported this year. How much will it raise? Well, remember, the government's already making more money because those companies are making higher profits through taxes. Another 10% on the 40% tax they pay on profits. Estimates between £1.2 to £2 billion a year would be generated. That's a lot of money, but it is a drop in the ocean with the scale of tackling the cost of living crisis and rising energy bills. If you spread that £2 billion across every energy bill, it would be £60 per household. Well, prices have already gone up £700. Another £800 is in the post. If you wanted to raise benefits for everyone on benefits and pensioners, that's going to cost £9 billion. So the windfall tax is not an answer to the cost of living crisis. It's merely a way of paying for part of it. The wider context of this cost of living crisis is something that's been discussed here day after day at the World Economic Forum, and it is some of the things that the government simply can't do anything about. There's global inflationary pressures driven by those rising in energy prices, and of course all of that exacerbated by the war in Ukraine that is causing the Russian gas issue is causing an energy crisis, and there's a food crisis on the horizon. Whatever the government does today will be of some short-term relief. We can't guarantee they won't need to do more. I've just spoken to the Director General of the World Trade Organization, and she said we are in for a rough time in the short to medium term. So consumers may get some relief today, but it might not be the last the government has to provide.
OK, and Ivor, any money is welcome, but as we're just hearing there from Paul, a couple of £100 is not going to cut it. We'll have to wait and see what the details are.
Yeah, exactly. That's right, Kate. I mean, if you want an illustration of just how severe this cost of living crisis is, have a look behind me. Over my shoulder is a food bank in a school. There's tins of baked beans, packets of cereal here that the school has set up to help hard-up families. Parents can help themselves if they're struggling to put food on the table. That's how hard things are for some people. But help, as you say, could be on the way, with the Chancellor set to announce this cut to energy bills. The £200 loan off our bills in October is set to be increased potentially to £400, and it may be made into a grant so you don't have to repay it. Other potential measures include potentially a one-off payment to vulnerable families, an expansion to the Warm Homes discount, potentially a VAT cut on fuel. But to talk more about this is Marion Drake, the head teacher here at Tyne Mill Academy. Marion, this food bank in a school, that is really serious, isn't it?
It is, it is. We set it up because we noticed a sharp increase in a number of families coming to us for food vouchers. So we set up a small food bank and a community fridge, and it's been tremendously appreciated and really well used.
Just quickly then, is £400 off your energy bill really going to make that much of a difference?
I think it's a start, but for lots of our children, our free breakfast and free lunch are the only meals they get in the day. So I think it's a start, but when things like this are needed in schools, more perhaps needs to be done.
All right, thanks, Marion. We will be speaking to parents as they arrive to drop off their children, and any help, clearly, is really, really needed.
Ivor and Paul, thank you both very much indeed for the update. Thank you. They both got the memo about the coat this morning, didn't they? Now, a prayer vigil has been held in Uvalde in Texas for the 19 children and 2 teachers shot dead at Robb Elementary School. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Senator Ted Cruz were among those who attended, offering support and sympathy to the community, but digging in against calls for gun control. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports from Texas.
As the sun went down in this small Texan town, the community came together in their hundreds. A moment for prayer, to reflect on the unimaginable. Beyond the hugs, though, how can anyone explain to dads like Stephen Garcia why his daughter Ellie is gone. There are private moments of grief all over. So often places like this are said to be tight-knit, but you can feel it here. So many know someone now in so much pain. And yet even here, even after something like this, the political divide over guns is so stark. The governor of Texas and his ally in the Senate, the men who block all attempts to change gun laws, they are here and not unwelcome.
There are 19 sets of parents who are never going to get to kiss their child goodnight again.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
The proposals from Democrats in the media, inevitably, when some violent psychopath murders people.
A violent psychopath who's able to get a weapon so easily. 18-year-old with 2 AR-15s.
If you want to stop violent crime, the proposals the Democrats have, none of them would have stopped this.
But why does this only happen in your country? I really think that's what many people around the world they cannot fathom. Why only in America? Why is this American exceptionalism so awful?
You know, I'm sorry you think American exceptionalism is awful.
I think this aspect of it.
You get your political agenda.
No, it's honestly,
God love you.
Senator, it's not. I just want to understand why you do not think that guns are the problem.
Why is this just an American problem?
It is just an American problem, sir.
Mr. Cruz, why is America the only country that faces this kind of mass shooting?
But you can't answer that. You can't answer that, can you, sir? You can't answer that. Why is this country...
Why is it that people come from all over the world to America? Because it's the freest, most prosperous, safest country on earth.
It may be the freest, it may be the most popular...
Why are our kids dying in school?
If that wasn't clear enough, the governor's earlier news conference struck the heart of this gulf in American society.
You're doing nothing.
No, you need to get this out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you're out of line.
The Republican leader of this state clashing with his Democratic rival. No common ground, no compromise. And so they left the vigil in their town that will now be remembered for just one thing. Until the next one. Mark Stone, Sky News in Texas.
Let's look at some of today's other headlines for you now. And 7 new cases of monkeypox have been identified in England, bringing the total number of reported infections in the UK to 78. There's been one confirmed case in Scotland, but none reported in Wales or Northern Ireland. Despite the rise in cases, the UK Health Secretary and the Security Agency says risk to the UK population remains low. Campaigners are warning guidance for rape trial prosecutors could dramatically reduce protection and rights to privacy for victims and turn them away from vital therapy. The End Violence Against Women Coalition, Rape Crisis England and Wales and the Centre for Women's Justice says that Crown Prosecution Service advice would increase the likelihood that rape victims' private therapy notes will be accessed by prosecutors and used to discredit them in court. Police have seized thousands of weapons and made nearly 2,000 arrests as part of a crackdown on knife crime. Officers say that razor blades fixed to toothbrushes, hunting knives and machetes were among the weapons confiscated during Operation Scepter in November. Students in Shanghai are to return to the classroom as China begins to ease COVID lockdown rules. Junior and senior high school pupils will be allowed back to school from the 6th of June, followed by a week later by final year middle school students. Other years will continue online classes for the rest of the term as part of a staggered return to normal life. To the war in Ukraine now. And President Zelensky has strongly condemned suggestions that Ukraine should give up control of its territory that is occupied by Russian forces. He compared those who argue for giving Russia a piece of Ukraine to those who ceded territory to Germany in 1938 in the hopes of preventing World War II. And the World Bank has warned that the war in Ukraine could trigger a global recession. World Bank President, that's David Malpass, said that higher food and energy prices would stunt growth and that some countries, including Germany, have already seen their economies slow down. The timings for the Platinum Jubilee weekend have been unveiled, with the celebrations just over a week away. Here's some of the highlights of what will happen as the nation pays tribute to the Queen's 70 years as sovereign. On Thursday, the Queen's birthday parade, Trooping the Colour, begins, and at 10:30, it's hoped that the Queen will make an appearance on the balcony to watch a special flypast. Friday, the royal family will attend a service of Thanksgiving at St Paul's Cathedral, followed by a Guildhall reception hosted by the Lord Mayor. On Saturday, the Queen and her family are expected to head to the races, Derby Day, of course, where the monarch is due to be greeted with a guard of honour made up of 40 of her past and present jockeys. And then on Sunday, the Jubilee pageant takes place in central London, with a 3-kilometre carnival procession moving down the Mall and past the Palace. And from Thursday next week, we'll have full coverage of all the Jubilee festivities, joined by our royal commentator Alistair Bruce and the one and only Joanna Lumley. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
We're in for another unsettled day, but things should settle down tomorrow. Mainly mild and breezy now, with cloud and rain across central parts. But northern Scotland is quite chilly with showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A man whose hands were left unusable, a debilitating condition, has been given a new lease of life after what's believed to be the world's first double hand transplant. 48-year-old Stephen Gallagher from Ayrshire was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that causes scarring of the skin and internal organs. It caused his fingers to start curling in until they were in a fist position. So he underwent a 12-hour operation last December after a suitable donor was found. He hopes to return to some form of work once his hands have improved enough. He says the thing that he's enjoying most is being able to stroke his dog again. Now, the Mail has a picture of Dame Deborah James, who attended the Chelsea Flower Show on Tuesday evening, the podcaster, who's recently revealed that she sadly is suffering from or receiving end-of-life care. Said she was honoured to find out that someone had named a rose after her. That's lovely, isn't it? Time shows the Ethiopian circus troupe, Circus Abyssinia, practising their acrobatic routines ahead of their show at the Underbelly Festival at London's Earl's Court. Their routine will include acrobatics, contortion and fire juggling. Finally, The Guardian brings us a picture of French tightrope walker Nathan Paulin, setting a world record by walking 1.4 miles across France, to Mont Saint-Michel. So from, I'm guessing, the mainland over to Mont Saint-Michel. Lovely. Top stories for you this morning. The Prime Minister is facing a fight to keep his MPs on side after Sue Gray's scathing report into lockdown parties in Downing Street. Chancellor will announce new measures later to help households struggling with the cost of living crisis. And a prayer vigil has been held in Uvalde in Texas for the 19 children and 2 teachers shot dead at Robb Elementary School. In the last half an hour, Downing Street Chief of Staff has told this programme he is shocked at the revelations staff in Number 10 were rude to cleaning and security personnel during lockdown parties. Steve Barclay also told me the Prime Minister is personally apologising to those affected in the wake of Sue Gray's report.
I was sat with the Prime Minister in his office when that report came in that he had commissioned, and it came into his office at 10 o'clock. And like him, I was shocked, particularly around what Sue Gray had said in terms of the cleaning staff. We had an all-staff meeting yesterday in Downing Street. Further to that, it is why we've had so many changes in terms of both myself going into Downing Street, the Permanent Secretary, a new Director of Communication, a new Principal Private Secretary. It's why we put procedures now in place. But we were appalled, and that's why, as I say, the Prime Minister apologised. It's why he went to the House of Commons and he said how humbled he was to read about what had happened.
What were you most shocked about?
I think what the disrespect to staff within the building, I think that was, for someone from me, growing up in Lancashire, coming from a background that I do, I was particularly shocked to read that.
And he's apologised personally to all of the staff that were affected?
He went and apologised to staff. Obviously, there's the shift rotas, so it's a question of which staff were in the building yesterday.
But he's gone to seek out the cleaning staff?
He has gone out to seek out staff to do that. He came to the House as well in terms of colleagues. And it's why he's made so many changes in response. And Sue Gray recognises those changes in the report and say those should now be able to bed down.
Tamara's in Downing Street for us this morning. Hi, Tamara. Thoughts? Good morning.
Morning, Kay. Well, Steve Barclay is one of the many new people in charge in Downing Street, and he says that that shows how much the culture has changed since the dark days detailed in Sue Gray's report. And very much the tone of what the Prime Minister said yesterday and Steve Barclay said today is, while the Prime Minister is very sorry about what happened, and he said he's humbled, he's learnt lessons from it, although the report showed that he attended 8 of the 16 gatherings that Sue Gray investigated, so he must have had a sense of what the culture was like in Downing Street. The worst excesses of the drinking, fighting, writing emails saying, I think we've got away with it, were not linked directly to him. There was no smoking gun leading to the Prime Minister that we didn't previously know about, just a sense that he was at the helm of an organisation, of a Downing Street in which people were routinely breaking the rules. And for that, he said he has learnt lessons and now hopes to move on. So what do we take from this report that we waited 6 months for? Can he move on? Well, in number 10, they're talking about it being a tough day, indeed a tough few months. They particularly focus on how appalled the Prime Minister was by the revelations, which they say he had no idea about rudeness to security and cleaning staff. And I've been told today that he apologised to some of those security staff last night and will apologise to some of the cleaners today when they come on shift. Does this move the dial, though? So immediately, it doesn't look like for Tory MPs, who are, of course, the most important voters the Prime Minister has to care about right now, anything is shifting imminently, like today or next week. But certainly, if the Prime Minister is not able to get things back on track, and he's going to try to do so today, we're expecting a very substantial package to help people with the cost of living. Conservative MPs, some of whom I spoke to last night, including some of those very loyal to the Prime Minister, know that he and they have been damaged by this episode. And if that damage cannot be healed over the coming months, which will involve some very difficult choices for families and for the government in terms of how much it spends to help people, then he may not be out of danger yet.
OK, thank you. Well, let's get more reaction to the Partygate report now, should we? Chris Bryant, Labour MP and Chair of the House of Commons Committee on Standards, joins us, as you can see. Hi, Chris, thanks very much for joining us on the programme
morning, Kate.
This morning. We're moving on now, says the government. They need to start to help people more with the cost of living crisis. That's exactly what they're going to do.
Well, they certainly should be doing that, because if you look at the average family in the Rhondda, my constituents said that they've lost £2,500 a year, and they can't see any means of making that up. That's the universal credit being cut and the significant increase in cost of living. But just to go back to the events of yesterday, Steve Barclay just said that everything's changed at Downing Street. Well, the one thing that hasn't changed is the Prime Minister. And he walked past these events, he attended these events, he raised a glass at them. He knew that they were happening. And I should make this may sound like a very pedantic point, but the rules don't say anywhere about work events, an exemption for work events. They simply said no gatherings were allowed. And these were gatherings, and he was at them. So he knew they happened. And indeed, you can see throughout Sue Gray's reports that quite frequently she refers to the obvious fact that a lot of the people who were attending these events knew that they were breaking the rules. They knew that these gatherings were breaking the rules. That's why they had to say, I think we've got away with it. And, the stories about vomit on the carpet and red wine stains up the wall and the cleaners having to clean this up. I think the most pernicious bit about the way the cleaners and the security staff were treated is these will be the people on the lowest salaries in Downing Street. These will be the people who did abide by the rules. And that's precisely the problem, that there is a set of people in Downing Street, and they're all still there, or nearly all of them are still there, who simply believe that the rules don't apply to them. There's one set of rules for everybody else in it, and there's one set of rules for them. And it even existed within Downing Street itself. So all the special advisors and the senior people were able to carry on as they wanted. But when the cleaners and the security staff said, look, this is just not right, you're not abiding by the rules, they were told where to get off. It's just morally indefensible, I think.
Yeah, the Prime Minister has addressed that, we're told by Steve Barclay, and he is apologising personally to all of those involved. Let me ask you, let me move on, because we've only got
sorry, Kay, but he isn't. Sorry, Kay, he isn't.
He says that he is.
He may sort of do that apology that sort of he did in the House of Commons yesterday, but it actually amounts to excuse after excuse after excuse. He doesn't believe he did anything wrong or that anybody else did. He's blind to his own failings.
He says, we're told that he has apologised to some staff personally, and he will apologise to more staff today when they come on to their shift pattern. So, we have to accept that is what the Prime Minister has said, and that's what he has done and will be doing. You're the chair of the House of Commons Committee on Standards. You've recused, there you go, yourself.
You're having difficulty this morning with words, Kay.
It would appear
you couldn't say
so,
France earlier.
Yeah, it would appear so. But you've recused yourself from that investigation. But procedurally, you will know what happens. So talk us through the investigation. What happens?
I also chair the Privileges Committee, which has 7 members on it. It's 4 Conservative members, 2 Labour and 1 SNP. The committee has to decide whether the Prime Minister has lied to Parliament, has misled Parliament. Incidentally, it's not whether he has deliberately, it's whether he has knowingly misled Parliament. It's an important difference, because if you think of Admiral Nelson, who put his spyglass up to his blind eye and said, "What ships? I see no ships." He was lying. He was knowingly lying. And I think that may be the conclusion that the Privileges Committee comes to. But I'm not sitting on it. As you say, I've recused myself. And what the committee will have to do is it will have to decide what evidence to gather, whether to call people in to give evidence. They could, if they wanted to, ask some of the cleaners and the security staff for their evidence, could ask other members of staff working in Downing Street for their evidence, could require all the email exchanges about following on from when the Prime Minister spoke to Parliament the first time about the issue, to see what and minutes of meetings that were held to discuss all of this. And at some point, no doubt, they would ask the Prime Minister to give evidence, either in person or in writing. And then they publish a report, which then goes to the House of Commons. It should take, I would guess, yeah. I'm really guessing here, but when the Standards Committee had to do a review a case that had been sent to us about the Prime Minister's holiday in Mustique a couple of years ago, from the moment that we got the memorandum, when the investigation had already been done, to completing it took 4 months.
Wow. So it'll be a while. Yeah. If the committee finds that he did mislead Parliament, he doesn't have to resign, though, does he?
No. Well, if the committee, it depends what the committee recommends. The committee could recommend that he be suspended from the House for a day or for 10 days. If it's for 10 days or more, and the House agrees to that suspension, then he could face a recall election in his own constituency if 10% of his voters think that there should be a by-election. So all sorts of things are possible, and I can't entirely prejudge it because I'm not going to be on the committee. Because I believe that the Prime Minister has lied. I think he's lied repeatedly. He's done so knowingly. Sometimes he deliberately chose not to know the facts. He didn't investigate the facts enough. But he was actually at the gatherings. So he knew that they had happened, but he told Parliament that they hadn't.
OK, well, he said that he thought they were work events, and that will take us back to the answer
you
gave me a few moments ago, so we won't go back to that. What we will do, though, is talk about if there's nothing to force Boris Johnson to quit, then what's the point of the investigation?
Well, they can force him to quit. If he's, I'm absolutely certain that if the Privileges Committee decides that the Prime Minister has misled Parliament, and sends a report to the House to that effect, Boris Johnson may still try to cling on, but I would have thought that at that point, every self-respecting member of the House of Commons would vote for whatever suspension is recommended by the committee. And if he's suspended from the House, he's out. That's it.
Yeah, but you need Conservative MPs to vote for that, don't you?
Well, at every stage, look, there are 4 Conservative members on the Privileges Committee, and I respect them. I have absolutely no questions about them. They will all want to do a very proper job. I know them individually, Alberto, Bernard, Andy and Laura, and I'm sure that they will do a very, very thorough job alongside whichever Labour MP replaces me and Alan Dorans. And if that committee comes to a conclusion, which has a Conservative majority on it, if it comes to a conclusion that the Prime Minister has lied to Parliament, I'm absolutely certain that the Prime Minister will leave office and probably leave Parliament.
But it's down to, at the end of the day, it's down to those Tory backbenchers that we often talk about, isn't it?
Well, in the first place, it's down to the committee, yes. Look, there's a big if at the beginning of all of this. Yes, I accept that. And normally when you say to me, Mr. Bryant, if such and such were going to happen, what would you say? And then I normally say, well, I don't answer hypothetical questions. So I throw it back to you. This is hypothetical. But nonetheless, hypothetically, if the committee decides that he has misled people and misled Parliament, then I think he'd be gone. But more importantly, I suppose, I think there's quite a lot of people in the Labour Party who've now decided that actually, for the Labour Party and for the next general election, let's keep Boris Johnson. I think a lot of voters in the country have made their mind up about a Conservative Party that keeps Boris Johnson, the culprit and the liar, as their leader. And indeed, 2 Conservatives I bumped into in the lift yesterday on the way to a vote, they said to me, look, we've lost the next general election because Tory colleagues won't act against him, even though they've seen it plain as a pikestaff. So, but the downside is it's bad for Britain because we've got 2 major crises going on, Ukraine and the cost of living crisis. Okay. And the Prime Minister isn't able to concentrate on either of them properly because this is going to go on and on and on. And all of these were unforced errors which stem from his personality. They'll all happen again.
That mimicking of my accent was a mile off, by the way.
I wasn't doing your accent. I didn't know you had an accent, Kay.
It's lovely to talk to you, as always. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Now, a review into the deaths of Arthur Labino Hughes and Star Hobson has called for dedicated child protection teams. The report says that there is too much ambiguity and inconsistency in the current system, which does not serve children or their families. Our Home Affairs editor, Jason Farrell, reports.
The report into the killing of Star Hobson and Arthur Labinjo Hughes is a depressing catalogue of failings, with the cases mirroring each other. Arthur was killed by his stepmother, Emma Tustin. His father, Thomas Hughes, was jailed for manslaughter. Here, on the day he died, Arthur was barely able to walk. The report says too often social workers in Solihull relied on his father's perspective. They didn't discuss concerns about his bruising with other agencies. It was the same with Star, simply not putting the pieces together.
There was a sort of inability to really know what was happening and to join the dots, if you like. And that's why we're proposing the establishment in every area, specialist multi-agency child protection units, teams, which will bring people from all the relevant disciplines and agencies together, working as one team.
Star was killed by her mother's lover, Savannah Brockhill. Her mother, Frankie Smith, was also found guilty of causing or allowing her death. Star's favourite playmate, her Aunt Alicia, made one of 5 referrals to social services.
I'm coming for you.
But this report says that in Bradford, the high turnover of social workers was exceptional. And despite Star's history, the person who made the home visit in the month Star was killed had no previous knowledge of the family and left the service the following week with the assessment incomplete.
I know social workers do have a lot of cases and, and it's hard, but it's like if you are going into that job, it's like the social workers that I dealt with to do with Star, it seemed to me like they weren't really that bothered.
The report makes clear that calls for a joined-up approach have been made for decades, and Arthur's cousin, Bernie Dixon, is sceptical.
The whole system needs an overhaul. If they're suspected that there's abuse, I believe they should have the power to remove that child. The RSPCA can remove a dog, but the social services can't remove a child without official documentation. And I think that needs to be looked at for emergency purposes.
This garden has been made in Arthur's memory. For Star, the family celebrated her birthday this month. They focus on the joy the toddler brought, though they can't escape the pain, and long for a system that will protect others from suffering their grief. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, the independent chair of the Bradford Partnership, Janice Hawkes, said in a statement, "We know agencies let Star down and we must put things right." The publication of this thorough and detailed independent review outlines very clearly the opportunities that we miss locally to better protect Star. We have already put in place steps to tackle this, but we recognise that there is still work to do, and as a partnership we are entirely committed to improving the safety of children across Bradford. Right, let's talk about the Sue Gray report, should we, with Will Walden, former press secretary to Boris Johnson. Hi, Will, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Your reaction to the report?
Yeah, morning, Kay. Look, honestly, I feel pretty depressed this morning. It's a sad day. I'm joining you from Athens, where I'm working this morning. I flew in last night and I had breakfast an hour ago overlooking the Acropolis. This is where democracy was born, and the UK prides itself on exporting democracy around the world. But I just think it's a bad day for democracy. I think the detail of this report is absolutely appalling. The partying, people vomiting on the walls. There was even a fracas, some sort of fight at the height of lockdown. And this is at the heart of the government of our country. And I think, brutally speaking, it's a bit of a frat party. And I think it's bad enough happening inside Number 10 outside of the pandemic, let alone during it. And I think ultimately the Prime Minister has to bear responsibility for that. And look, when this first broke, I said to you at the very beginning of this that Boris sets the tone. He loves to be loved. He loves to run a relaxed show. And unfortunately, I think that this is the result. And I'll give you one example. Martin Reynolds, who your viewers will probably know now, Party Marty. He's the guy that we now understand sent the email that said, I think we've gotten away with it. Boris's principal private secretary. I know Martin. He's a lovely guy. He's very, very capable. But you have to ask, why was he enabling all this to happen? He's the Prime Minister's office gatekeeper. He's not some detached civil servant. This guy was handpicked by Boris at the time, plucked from an ambassadorial job in Libya. They'd worked together at the Foreign Office. The idea that this was all happening in some parallel universe seems to me nonsense. And I think overridingly, what worried me yesterday is that, Boris reiterated that he took personal responsibility, that he was humbled and he was sorry. And in a sense, he absolutely is. But what worried me was that at every opportunity, he seemed to minimise that. He emphasised how brief his visits to the parties were. He defended his own actions. And what was extraordinary is he said when it came to thanking staff at a gathering which someone was fined for and therefore was illegal, he didn't think he'd done anything wrong, and actually he'd do it again. And I think what worries me about that is that it makes the whole apology seem somewhat irrelevant, like he's some sort of toddler who's been forced into an apology. He gets caught and he runs off protesting the unfairness of it all. Where I would disagree with, say, Chris Bryant, who you had on a few minutes ago, is that I've known Boris for a long time, he will be genuinely shocked and sorry about the rudeness towards cleaning and security staff. So what Steve Barclay says is absolutely true. That's not his bag at all. He would have been genuinely appalled. But I think there's a problem here. I think the rest of it, unlike a lot of people, he doesn't see this as the big deal that people are making out. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is why he thinks that.
Do you think he knew what was going on?
No, not. I don't think there's anything deliberate here. I mean, I think you'd have to be fairly blind not to notice, music pumping out in the middle of the night, or people going on longer, or frankly, bottles strewn everywhere or vomit on the walls. On the other hand, he's running a country during a pandemic, and I think that's the problem. My feeling from reading the report yesterday and listening to the whistleblowers who were on the BBC's Panorama programme the other night is that Downing Street, unlike the rest of the country, was a bubble of normality. There was no sign whatsoever that any of the changes that were made to the rest of the country were made inside Downing Street. And I think this is clearly why the partying, the sort of wine time Fridays at 4 p.m, didn't raise any eyebrows, because everything else was carrying on as normal. No restrictions, no distancing in office life. So when the workday ended, life carried on as normal. No one else was having leaving parties because no one else was in a normal working environment around the country. And honestly, Kay, I cannot fathom why Downing Street didn't put in best practice from the off. Screens, one-way corridors, essential staff only. Of course they're responding to a pandemic, but why did the Prime Minister and his senior staff not say, I want the 30 most senior people in this building in every day. Everyone else works remotely. And leadership is about setting responsibility, setting the tone. And I don't think Boris did in that sense. And yesterday, what worried me was that Boris seemed to admit that a leaving party was a normal and nice thing to do. It was leadership. But in a world where everybody at that time was cancelling weddings, funerals, christenings, not visiting dying relatives, not having a leaving party seems to me a pretty basic sacrifice to make. And I think he genuinely considered Downing Street to be an exception to the rules. He and others didn't do anything wrong because they were in a very specific, very high-pressured situation. But so were NHS doctors saving lives. And if they had partied with people from outside Number 10, they would have known it was wrong. But within the building, they were all working together, so therefore the rules weren't the same. And I think he probably genuinely believes that. And hence those who think otherwise are political opportunists, or they're just being like massively over the top. So when it comes to resignation, why would he consider resigning when he doesn't really think that he's done anything fundamentally wrong?
Well, we're out of time. Eloquently put, as always. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. Take care.
You too. Still to come on the programme, more reaction to the Partygate report as Downing Street's Chief of Staff tells this programme Boris Johnson is apologising to staff who suffered abuse in the wake of the lockdown gatherings.